I am the Maven of the Eventide, and welcome to Vampire Reviews! For real. Let's talk about Fright Night. Although Tom Holland's 1985 directorial debut isn't exactly a classic, it is super iconic as an 80s vampire film. Creeping horror, teenagers having zany adventures, dance clubs, deliciously cheesy practical effects, nobody dying except the best friend and sex workers, flaming puppets.
You deserve to die, boy.
It stars Chris Sarandon as the vampire, who you might better know from more memorable roles.
But it's gonna be so much more moving when I strangle her on our wedding night.
Surprised, aren't you? I knew you would be.
Welcome to Fright Night. For real.
It was remade in 2011 starring Colin Farrell because in 2011, vampires were hot.
Welcome to Fright Night.
For real.
And why think up something new and original and interesting to do with them when you can just churn out a remake? Okay, remakes get a bad rap. It's not like the original Fright Night was beyond improvement. It already had a terrible 80s sequel. Maybe this remake was worthwhile. It's possible. Now, if you were a studio exec in the midst of the vampire craze of a few years ago, you were probably scrambling to find hot vampire properties to cash in on. Remaking a well-liked but not as well-remembered 25-year-old film like Fright Night with a sexy new cast and modern aesthetics for a new generation probably seemed like a great idea, guaranteed to make bank. So how come it made even less money than the original? I'm pretty sure this chart doesn't account for inflation. Well, here's your problem. The vampires that were hot in 2011 were a different type of vampires from the 80s horror. They were the brooding boyfriends who wanted to talk, not scare, but there was tons of pushback against this. Tons of people who wanted to see the scary, heartless vampires. So the remake is a vampire movie for everyone who was sick of Twilightification. But if that's what the filmmakers wanted to capitalize on, then why did they advertise the film like this? The beautiful vampire face in the background reminds me of... oh, right. Right down to the red eyes. In the foreground, we have a brooding and very pretty teenage boy. The axe is at least a violent detail, but it's not enough. Even though the vampire is sexy in Fright Night sometimes, the feel of the movie is not romantic. So the poster for the original focused on, oh, look, horror. Yeah, if you want to reel in a horror-loving audience, this is much more effective. Over here, the blood spatter logo is a nice touch, but again, not enough. Everyone is just too beautiful. These posters make you think the film combines the humans from Zombieland with the vampires from Twilight and will have none of the terrifying animalistic monsters the anti-Twilight crowd were clamoring for. Was the photographer like, okay, Colin Farrell, make the camera want you to bite its neck, yes. No, none of the scary stuff. Seduce the audience in, and then we'll shock them when they're in the seats. Hint, that's not how you seduce horror fans, who are your target audience here, right? Even though the trailer did focus on action and the vampire's menace, every shot of him is calculated to amplify his hotness. In the actual film, he becomes more like what many horror fans may have wanted, but was the trailer afraid if it showed that it would turn off the Twilight crowd? Well, blue filter or no, any Twilight fans who were maybe tricked into seeing it were sorely displeased by the bait and switch. There was no way this film was going to appeal to both groups, and because they tried to sell it that way, the advertising appealed to no one. If they had just made a commitment to horror in the promotion, I'm certain it would have made money with the anti-Twilight crowd. Even the best films can fail at the box office due to bad advertising choices, but how is the remake itself? In general, it's decently made, which is a lot more than most vampire films can claim. But as a vampire film and as a remake of the 1985 Fright Night? Well, Many stories, especially vampire stories, are timeless. You can remake them in any era, and their themes and messages are applicable to the human condition. Sure, we can get tired of hearing that same old story, but it still has meaning. But Fright Night is not one of those stories. It is very much a story of its era. Like the intentionally cheesy title implies, it was for a time when vampire movies were already considered old-fashioned. Horror had relinquished the gothic-style monsters for psycho-slashers, aliens. This is why most vampire films you actually remember from the 80s are ones credited with reinventing the vampire genre. It had become kind of impossible to do vampires the old way and get people to care about them anymore. The sort of people who were still into that were considered washed up, outmoded, a little lame. And Fright Night is a film that deals with the feelings of such a position. It doesn't do it through indulgent nostalgia, but as an examination of how the pop culture landscape changed. A State of the Vampire address. Its premise takes the vampire out of the dusty old gothic setting and puts it in modern-day suburbia, which may seem cliché nowadays, but in 1985 it was a pretty fresh subversion. What if the real classic horror was in your very neighborhood, but no one believed you in this newfangled era of modern monsters? And what does that old-style vampire symbolize? Well, among many things, it is an expression of sexuality. A big theme of the classic stories was that if a woman gets bitten by a vampire, she goes from being an innocent to becoming a sexual creature, and then is ultimately punished for this with her own demise if she cannot find a way to reject it entirely and return to her innocence. Heroes rush in to save victims, and evil is vanquished. How many times have we seen this story? Even by the 80s, people were tired of it. They definitely didn't want to see it anymore in 2011. It's kind of oppressive. Though the main character of the 1985 film is teenage Charlie dealing with his new vampire neighbor, the heart of the film is this character, Peter Vincent. His journey is the film's center of self-awareness. He's a has-been horror actor pining for the glory days of an era that has no place of relevance in modern media. He helps Charlie defeat the vampire and has a much greater character arc in overcoming his cowardliness than Charlie's arc of not much of anything. Peter is a man plagued by insecurity, shame, delusion, and he faces an opportunity to become all the things he's pretended to be but never before achieved. Conquer his imposter syndrome. He rises to the challenge, and at the end of the film is ready to revise his perception of a past irrelevant era and embrace a future where media has a different impact on pop culture than he's used to. Wait, am I still describing Peter or the film itself now in its meta-awareness? Fright Night did meta years before Scream did it. The film starts with Charlie's girlfriend Amy admitting she's scared to have sex. Oh my god, how cliche 80s teenager horror movie, am I right? But in case you weren't clear on how meta this film is being, a minute later, she's like, oh wait, never mind, I guess we can do it. And it's not the fear society's inflicted on her that cockblocks Charlie. It's a vampire suddenly moving in next door. Ha 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 ha, Charlie's never going to get laid now. Tom Holland, who also wrote the film, based it on the story of the boy who cried wolf. And the bulk of it consists of people not believing Charlie that his sexy, charming neighbor, Jerry, is a vampire. The emotional stakes aren't so much life and death as, will Charlie lose his girlfriend because of his obsession with Jerry? When Jerry bites Amy, and she turns into the cliché vampire seductress, the total opposite of her reluctant first-scene self, Charlie doesn't want it then. No, not that way. When Jerry is slain, she turns back human, but now she is ready to have the sex. 'Cause what's there to be afraid of about silly old sex when you've survived vampires, right? This is so 80s. But a subversion of the gothic stories where the woman with awakened sexuality is either killed or returned to innocence, so that's nice. But by the time 2011 came around, we were definitely tired of sexual repression stories, and anyway, how can you remake a meta film years after the meta trend has been done to death? Well, the remake doesn't go full meta, thank goodness. We do get homages to vampire films and tropes, but most of the references feel more forced than fun.
Don't expect me to join your little Scooby gang.
More significantly, though, the 2011 film abandons the boy who cried wolf theme, and this is where it starts to unravel. Unlike the 1985 Jerry's elaborate network of pretense, Colin Farrell's Jerry does very little to keep his vampire nature secret, which changes the whole premise of a vampire in suburbia from scary to ridiculous. Jack Humperdinck's Jerry was charismatic, and I guess that's what the 80s considered hot, until he was downright scary. Farrell's Jerry gets all the flattering framing from filmmakers with all the shallow intentions, but he does nothing to be charming. He's awkward and then sleazy.
Takes a real man to wear, puce.
Did this movie think we wouldn't get that he's a bad guy without making his human persona a total creep?
And your girl, Amy, she's ripe. I bet there's a line of guys dying to pluck that.
Was it afraid if he were actually charming, the audience would mentally file him with Twilight and dismiss his menace? Understandably, the 85 movie didn't have to worry about this cultural association, so it could really play up the dichotomy between who Jerry's pretending to be and who he actually is. This depiction is a classic trait of the vampire. Part of what makes them so thrilling as a monster. Charlie is the only one who can see through Jerry's facade, but all his loved ones are tricked. That's terrifying for Charlie. And Jerry keeps gaslighting him, keeps messing with his head right up until his secret's truly out. But the new movie doesn't even try to go there with it. The element of deception, of the charming vampire's betrayal, is not really part of Farrell's Jerry. But I think that was intentional. Because, again, did we really need to see a repeat of that old story? Yes, that duplicitous element is classic. The horror of the monster walking among us that could dupe us into becoming as evil as it is. And it's one of my favorite aspects of the vampire, but it's not wrong that the remake didn't focus on this. And despite being an obvious money grab, it wasn't completely soulless. The 2011 film gets a lot of criticism for not knowing what it wanted to be compared to the 85 film, which knew precisely that it was styling itself as a love letter to the golden age of Gothic cinema and its dying fanbase and a modernizing world, but the remake couldn't be that, so it had to be something else. And I think what it at least was trying to accomplish has merit. So I'm imagining the thought process of the filmmakers when something like this. Wow. The old movie was meta horror. It paid tribute to and deconstructed the feelings associated with all vampire cinema that came before, right? So what's become of vampires since then that we can deconstruct now? I don't know. What? They become cool! Yeah! Look, so cool! So let's deconstruct coolness. And that's what the remake does. Now, I, of course, am an expert on coolness. My mom says I'm cool. So let's start with Charlie, restyled from the 80s nerd to the brooding pretty boy. This Charlie has shunned his geeky past, kicked his best friend to the curb, and become cool. And kind of a jerk. Though there's no way the late great sweetheart Anton Yelchin could ever come across as totally unlikable, at least now Charlie has a place to grow from. In the 85 film, he was a representative of the contemporary horror fan, and it was a story for the nerd, but he didn't have much room for an arc. He battles a vampire, but emerges from it as a proud nerd who was proved right. By the end of the remake, Charlie has learned to stop trying to be someone he's not. It's not that you can't be nerdy and cool at the same time, but being an asshole about it? That's not you, Charlie. Though his father is absent in both films, the remake actually does something with this aspect. Charlie's lack of a male role model is reflected in his interactions with Jerry and Peter, and through both, he learns what kind of man he wants to be.
I don't want to live till tomorrow if you're the kind of man I'm gonna be.
So in the remake, the role of the super nerd with meta knowledge is relegated to Charlie's friend Ed. In the original, Ed was weird because he laughed too much, but he didn't believe Jerry was a vampire any more than anyone else.
Very funny, Brewster!
In the remake, Ed is now the one with the special insight. And there's this scene where...
So you're glad you're different then?
Get back!
How can you be in a place like this? These people, even your best friend, you're nothing to him now. You were born for this.
It's every vampire fan's dream come true! Sure, Ed's torn, cause it's terrifying, but Jerry's speech to him is full of manipulative awareness. Though I'm not so sure about the message here. Yes, it would be great to turn your outcastness into awesomeness, but ultimately it's evil? So embracing being different is bad? What happened to letting our freak flags fly? Is this supposed to provide perspective for Charlie's development? Like, Being a little different is okay, but oh, whoa there, not too much. Society.
You hadn't turned out to be such a dick, I might have tricked you out. We could have rocked this evil shit together.
In the original, Ed served more purpose for Peter Vincent's arc. Slaying Ed is when Peter finally becomes everything he's pretended all his life. And it is hard for him. Ed takes so long to die, and Peter's distraught throughout. Growth isn't supposed to be easy.
Peter Vincent.
In the remake, Peter's played by David Tennant, as Russell Brand, as Chris Angel. That's like what, coolness cubed? His career change to a Vegas illusionist highlights the theme of coolness being superficial. Charlie finds out almost immediately upon meeting him that more than his stage tricks are illusions. And this fuels Charlie's realization that coolness, that is, trying to be the kind of person he thinks the world wants him to be at the expense of goodness, is not the right path. Peter's patheticness in the remake is explained with a tragic backstory of a vampire slaughtering his family. He's coped through alcoholism and pretense, but like the original film, he is ultimately a coward who must rise to bravery.
I guess I don't want to be a man like me either.
The tragic backstory makes this character trait less poignant, though. It's too convenient an excuse for his obsession with vampires. Unlike the original Peter, who was just a nerd for them. I mean, cool for them. My mom says nerds are cool. The tragic backstory is made even more cheesy when it's revealed that the very vampire who killed his family is the one who just so happens to move in next door.
Look at you all grown up.
Charlie's mom is reimagined as the cool, hot mom, but not much trope subversion happens with her, so that coolness is kind of just played straight.
Attitude.
In the 85 film, everyone except the vampire looked like normal people, not movie stars, and Amy, especially, was meant to be the girl next door. But in the remake, now she's the hottest girl in school. And no longer sexually scared and repressed, she's a confident young lady with no hang-ups about her sexuality, whatever she decides to do with it. Go Amy. So what the heck does she see in Charlie? Everyone wants to know, as hotness is universally accepted as the highest form of social currency.
I knew you were dweeb. Oh, you think I wanted some dude like Mark or Ben? No. I like you because you're different.
She's the perfect woman! But we really don't know anything about her. Where's her depth coming from? In the original, she was nerdy too, but in this, she has no development other than she's not like the other hot girls because she likes nerds. Amy only gets to be a vampire briefly. In the 85 film, her transformation into seductress is drastic, but in the remake, she's already the hottest girl in Hot Town, so she doesn't have anywhere to go. And that's kind of representative of her entire character here. The movie removed the whole deal with the vampire being her sexual awakening, which, thank you, but it doesn't replace it with anything else. So Amy ends up as a character with no dynamics of her own to just serve as a symbol to motivate Charlie. When she becomes a vampire, it's an instant personality flip.
You should have saved me, Charlie.
That's some messed up shallow vampire evil right there. At least in the 85 movie, her transformation was gradual and conflicted and focused on her as a person. The remake generally fails to deconstruct coolness in women with the same depth it does the men. But let's get back to the actual vampire. Well, here's our answer for Jerry's nonsensical behavior. It's just not cool nowadays to pretend to be human and blend in. Who were the cool vampires of the past 25 years? The ones who were proud and publicly vampires, bold and brazen. Except, yeah, this attitude is completely at odds with the plot of a story about a vampire hiding in plain sight. This particular vampire exploration needed to be in its own movie, not a Fright Night remake. In the 85 film, Jerry chops off victims' heads so they don't come back as vampires. He's not Dracula spreading his evil seed around London. He's the serial killer next door, making people disappear. This is scary in a different way, and creates some great suspense in the film when even the audience can doubt Charlie's certainty. But also, it's just logical for keeping his secret. In the 2011 film, it makes no logical sense that Jerry's making a nest army of vampires in his basement. It makes him cooler because he's not hiding, But how did he think this would even work? Or if he really doesn't care about being exposed so quickly because he's, going to take over the world, why is he just doing this here and now? In the 85 film, we can believe the slip-ups that catch Charlie's notice are maybe because it's Jerry's first time trying to integrate into suburbia and he's got a learning curve. But I don't buy it in the 2011 film at all, even in such an isolated neighborhood. Cool guy Jerry is just too careless to make sense. But logic aside, in deconstructing coolness, there is a great point here in how Jerry's modern cool guy brazen attributes come off as downright disgusting. He tries to bond with Charlie before turning threatening.
Women who look a certain way, they need to be managed.
And even though he doesn't react aloud, the audience can intuit Charlie's emotional response. Is this misogynistic display of toxic masculinity a reflection of the man he will become if he keeps trying so hard to maintain his own cool guy image? The remake also eliminates the character of Jerry's helper buddy from the first film, because ambiguously gay roommates aren't cool, but without him, Jerry's character is stripped of the last thing that could give him an emotional connection. He's been around for hundreds of years. He has to have some kind of interpersonal past, but we get none of it. There's no question that the original Jerry was a true monster, but he still had sensitivity and desires. What does Jerry even want in the remake? Survival? World domination? Who is he? The 1985 film made a more impactful statement with its goals because it embraced a more complex vampire. In the 80s, you didn't have to force so much pure evil onto a vampire to make them scary. The fact that they were a vampire at all was scary enough. They could still be otherwise charismatic or even compassionate and still be freaking terrifying. By 2011, were audiences so desensitized to vampires that any element of humanity made them not monstrous enough? As a reaction to Twilight and rebellion against romance, a hearkening back to the era of the true horror movie vampire, the 2011 movie just went too far. The idea that in 1985 vampires were real vampires, not like these sad sacks we have nowadays, is skewed. The original Jerry has feelings and depth. He's loved and lost. He cares about his helper monkey. A character needs to love something to be compelling as a person, and the best vampires blend monstrousness with pathos. Despite actor Colin Farrell's natural beauty and charm, his character's shallow disconnectedness negates any seductive potential. He's just too awful. It was actually actor Chris Sarandon's idea to have Amy look like Jerry's dead ex. Apparently, the original script didn't give him enough depth, so thank you for that, Jackerdink. Of course, it was also his idea to constantly be eating apples because he decided that Jerry had fruit bat DNA. That's really silly. But in effect, it actually comes off as pretty creepy and could maybe be some kind of original sin metaphor? Though if this is supposed to be a Twilight reference, I am officially done here. Let me just say that I do like the remake. It touches on enough of the 85 film while adding some fun updates with technology and effects. The car chase scene is awesome, and the women get to do some good action stuff. The vampire themes are necessarily different from what it's remaking, and unfortunately turn out to be less interesting and effective, but not totally unimportant. I wish I could just Frankenstein the two movies together into one great one. I am the Maven of the Eventide, and no, I'm totally cool. I'm hip. I'm with it. I'm gnarly. On fleek. Hi, Mom! I want you to subscribe to my YouTube channel. I want you to like this video and leave me comments. I want you to join my Patreon. Did that work?